Okay, so now what do I do?
That's it.
So where am I though? I can't see. How did I get rid of this? Where it says, got it?
Got it.
Okay, hi. See, I got a few more people here. Okay, excellent. So we are going to, I might have to stand up every once in a while because I like to see everybody who's in the room, but I'm just talking to the few people on the Zoom. So we're going to start today with the thing that says Lurianic Kabbalah. I hope you were able to download that. Lurianic Kabbalah. And this is about the Arizal. Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to do that, and then we'll go the next sheet. The second one after that will be with the one that's the heading says 16th century early Achronim. You know.
This is what you did last time you stopped here.
Oh, thank you. I could not remember. Thank you. Okay.
Myself know.
Okay, excellent. So I'll just review it slightly for, but if you don't mind, I'm going to stand up now. So you'll probably just see part of my body. Sorry about that. Okay. Well, maybe actually you can see me better. Okay. So I'll just give a brief review. We had done the week even before that about Rabbi. We're focusing now on the Jews at Eretz Yisrael, the great Rabbonim from this time period. So we're talking about 16th century. So a lot of the Jews, there's always like a native population, you know, that had remained, you know, for over centuries, but a very, very sparse Jewish population in Eretz Yisrael until the time period when the Sephardim start moving in, and then they become the dominant presence actually in Israel until Ashkenazim will come much, you know, centuries afterwards. But at this point, and we had discussed this also last week. Of course, we know the holy city of Yerushalayim, but most of them ended up living eventually in Tzfat. There definitely is, you know, there are Jews, of course, living in Yerushalayim, very tiny community in Hebron. Maybe Tveria had, you know, a few Jews. My feeling is why they were not more perhaps in Yerushalayim. It's very congested, very, you know, very narrow streets. And, you know, there definitely was disease. You know, the health conditions were quite poor there. So I think a lot of them, maybe, although it's just very ethereal in Tzfat, you know, you're in the mountains. I mean, of course, Yerushalayim is the mountains too, but I don't know, there is something magical about being in Tzfat, and they seem to gravitate. And while there are definitely yeshivot in, of course, and a small one in Hebron, but yeshivot in Yerushalayim, I'm not sure what Tveria had at this point. But especially for the Kabbalists in particular, you know, they're the ones who went and settled in the city of Tzfat. Okay, so we're talking about the Arizal. Kabbalah had been, you know, in existence for centuries. It was some in Spain. It was more like a metaphysical type of, you know, philosophical view of Kabbalah. And then there was actually in Germany, Rabbi Huda HaChassid, and he had was very ascetic way of life. But the Kabbalah, those people go to these Kabbalah centers, you know, they're studying, you know, and Hasidus is based on Lurianic Kabbalah. So I'm going to explain a little bit about it. I don't fully understand it. I'm certainly not an expert in Kabbalah, but, you know, just so you have a little inkling about what Lurianic Kabbalah was. The Arizal, what did I discuss about him? Okay, so the original, or the more, the prior to the Arizal was his Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, who's known as Ramak. And the one interesting thing I do want to emphasize, but I found this quite fascinating, that all these Kabbalists were still well versed in the study of Talmud and Halacha, and then they would have started, you know, their interest in Kabbalah. But first, they were Talmudists, all right, and then they were influenced in a different direction. The Arizal, you see, was born in the year 1534. He was actually born in Yerushalayim. But then he moved, his father died when he was still a baby. So his mom relocated to Cairo, Egypt. She had a brother there, and I think he was a well-off man. Eventually, the Ari writes, actually, he marries his cousin, right, the uncle's daughter, and then the uncle helps to support him. I guess everyone could see he was a very brilliant scholar. And then he learned under, we're going to learn more about these men in that next sheet I gave you. But he learns under this man, Rabbi Bezalel Ashkenazi, who was the chief rabbi of Egypt at that time. But then he now starts studying Kabbalah. And, he said he had a vision, Eliyahu came to him, and that he should now be devoting himself to the study of Kabbalah. And it's interesting, you think of Rabbi Yosef Karo, and we think of him as a preeminent halachicist, but he also was influenced by Kabbalah, and he also felt like a voice. He called it the Magid would speak to him. So it's interesting what was going on, in the city of Tzfat at this time period. But the Ari then made the decision, and told he's living his earlier years in the city of Cairo, and then moves in 1570 to Tzfat. And he learns for just a short while because Rabbi Moshe Cordovero was a much older man at this point, and then everyone saw the brilliance of the Ari, so he takes over the mantle from Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. And he, I'll tell you a little bit more later, but the Arizal never wrote anything down. So his preeminent student was this Rabbi Chaim Vital, who would sit there and he would take notes, sort of like Rabbi Soloveitchik. He didn't really write all those different articles and books you see they're floating around now. They were taken or recorded by students and then published at a later date. Actually, I don't think any of them were published till after he had passed away. So just bear that in mind. The unfortunate thing, I don't know the reason why the Arizal only lived to be 38 years old. That was very sad. And again, the reason that we have under the tutelage of the Ari, and it will eventually be published and then spread all over the Jewish world. And it's going to have actually a very strong impact on even the Jews of Europe. So it's not going to be just something amongst Sephardic Jews, right? It's going to influence Ashkenazi Jews as well. Okay, so the last page, this is what Lurianic Kabbalah believes in. Okay, so I'm going to tried my best to help explain it. I do have to say this is thanks to Rabbi Beryl Wine. All right. So let's go over that. All right. The last page on this thing that says Lurianic Kabbalah. And again, this becomes the normative way of viewing Kabbalah, right? Forget that metaphysical or that very ascetic way of life. Now that this is this other interpretation. So again, I'll just read it to you. It's a little hard to follow, but do the best you can. It says, Kabbalah emphasized the concepts of Hashem's seeming self-limitation, called Sod HaTzimtzum, as if his essence, right, is being conflated. It allows for free will and evil to freely coexist in the world. This is before reading it. It's as if when Hashem made the world, obviously there are forces, even like the Yitzhak, right? It's a Tov, they exist, but that's from the time of creation. And it's as if but the sparks of goodness, as if they were self-contained and then they get burst into the air. It is then the duty of Kabbalists or Jews in general to, so to speak, collect all these different sparks and then to have one, that good will then dominate the world. So I'll just give you here some of the words that are listed here. The release of the sparks. These are from different various broken vessels. They're called shvirat kelim. And now the necessity is now to collect, right? all these sparks that are all over the world. And that's called Nitzotzei Kedusha. Again, the holy sparks, the good ones, and so to speak, to redeem them. And then, through this spiritual redemption, this is called this a secret. It's called Sod HaTikun. So I believe, I find it so funny. We all grew up, as from Jews, and we knew to follow the mitzvot of the Torah. All of a sudden, like reforming conservative Jews, Tikkun Olam. It's everything was Tikkun Olam, just live a good life. I mean, and they don't mean by following the mitzvot in any case, in their way of interpreting it. But it's coming from this concept, how can we repair the world through, obviously, good deeds? We will bring back all these various sparks, so they will then be the dominant force in the world. There is emphasis, and then I told you about Chaim Vital. He's the one who will ultimately write down these words of the Ari, and we'll do more on him, and then how did it come then to be known to Jews elsewhere? All right. There's emphasis on the Jewish exile, right, the Golas, and all its sufferings. Let's bear in mind. So if I tell you that a lot of these Kabbalists now, they're Sephardic Jews. These were Jews who either they personally, their families were forced to leave Spain, 1492. Again, just re-emphasize this. The Jews who left in 1492 are the Jews who wanted to live full lives as Jews. They did not want to be conversos. They did not want to have this duality in their existence, and they opted to leave Spain. Many of them went to, I would say the majority then go to Portugal. They're welcomed into Portugal. It's a refuge for them, but eventually the king there also forces them to all to be baptized. There is an edict of expulsion, but really they're not expelled. They are forcibly converted. And eventually in the 1500s, I know that they were not permitted to leave then. The king wanted to keep them there. So, but in the 1500s, especially once the Inquisition was instituted in Portugal for 1536, Jews are going to start trickling out of Portugal. Some, of course, will go to parts of Western Europe, but a very, very large number will first go to Italy, and some will actually settle in Italy, but many others will then go to the Ottoman Empire, where the Sultan invites them in. And initially, many of them are settled mostly in Constantinople or Adrianople. He wanted to build up those cities, but Jews will settle in Greece, in the Balkans, and eventually they will come to the Middle East, to Israel, but also like Syria. Their Jews, some of these Sephardic Jews will come to Egypt as well. We'll learn a bit more about those other communities. So in any case, so this Kabbalah appealed to them. They had been living under, very trying conditions, very, difficult things, great upheaval in their lives. I guess that's why the concepts of the Kabbalah somehow, appealed to them. And again, through this Tikkun Olam, trying to collect all these various sparks, this will lead to our eventual Geula. That's why, there's a lot of this feeling of a belief in the Mashiach. I don't know about you. I don't think about that, quite honestly. I try to live, a good life and do the mitzvot, and Hashem in his time, if he wants to, he will send a Mashiach. I don't spend time worrying about it because there's nothing I can do about it, right? Except, as I say, try to live a good life. So again, based on the Ari's writings, so I find it hard to comprehend this. If you think you do it any better, God bless you. But again, you want to collect all these various sparks, which had been set loose when Hashem created the world. And then once all these sparks are collected, from the Khalifot, and then the Mashiach will come, and there will be, it's the final act of the Sod HaTikun, this Tikkun Olam, all right? Ultimately, that will be the end result. Hashem, mankind will then be restored to its divine mission of holy service to God. There'll be peace and harmony. And he felt that this was a necessity, that one should study this and devote energy to this. So this Hasidus is based on this belief and concept. Okay. So I think we'll leave, right? Lurianic Kabbalah for now. We have covered that. Let me just see. Here are some of my, I might have mentioned last time, I just want you to know, why is he called the Ari? Ari is a lion. It's because he was referred to as Eloki Rabbi Yitzchak, right? Because his name was Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, but it's called Lurianic Kabbalah because of his name, the Luria part of his name. Okay, I think I covered everything else. Eventually, the work will be published in something called Eitz Chaim, but we'll learn about that a little more when I cover Rabbi Chaim Vital. So now the next thing that I wanted to discuss with you, because I found this really interesting. I have here, all right, so the one that says, now we're doing the page that says 16th century early Achronim, Turkey, Greece, Egypt, and Israel. I want you to see how all these various rabbanim, some you may have heard of, some I never had even heard of before, but they each one impacted and influenced the other. So I wanted to just give you a little bit about their biographical thing and any special things they might have written. And because there's always a flow of ideas, going back and forth among, the various Jewish communities. But, bear in mind what I had mentioned before about Rabbi Yosef Kara and even Rabbi the Ari. They first study halacha, the Talmud, they become experts in that, and then they start dabbling in Kabbalah. Okay. So, these people who go to these Kabbalah things, they don't know anything about Jewish law or anything. They're just, I don't know, this somehow appeals to them. I can't even understand it. So it doesn't appeal to me. Yes.
Comes from that particular era.
Which one?
Because when you look at the kosher places, they starting with a special shritat.
No, that's something, that's not, I don't think so. I don't know anything about the shechita of the Sfardim. My husband works in a Century Grill. He gets these calls from people. What meat? Like, what are we serving that day? But the thing, have to understand, meat comes from various sources. Some only one will eat the Lubavitch shechita. This, but it's very hard to know. Once they unwrap the raw meat and they're going to cook it, you can't tell. I mean, it all comes in with a hechsher. I mean, but there are various ones from various places. The only one, Rebbe so and so. He says to them, if you don't know what, if we can't tell you 100%, but order some fish. What can you do? So, okay. All right. So now let's do, it's all kosher. Right, exactly. At first, when you have to understand every item that comes in probably has at least 5 hashgachas in any case, from Rabbanim, my husband said he never heard of in his life. Okay. So now let's review again, and you're going to see how each impacts the other. Now, the first Rav, whose name I have here, again, these, by the way, these are called the Achronim, the early Achronim. We had finished the Rishonim last year, and now we're now into the period of the Achronim, but these, you could call these 16th and 17th centuries early Achronim. Okay, so the first one, again, I had not heard of this man before, but as I'm going through all these various Rabbanim, how he influenced a lot of them. So I thought it was important that we should start with him. So his name was Rabbi Yosef Taitatsit. Okay, it's hard for me to pronounce. 1465 to 1546. He also had to leave Spain. He's, listen, from 1465 to 1492, he's living in Spain. But again, the edict of expulsion comes into effect. He has to leave Spain with his father and brother. They never talk about the women, So, I presume there might have been a wife, there must have been some sisters. Some of them were already married men, they had children also, but I'll talk about them. Okay. They first go to Salonika. Salonika is in Greece, and I told you that's modern day Thessaloniki. Okay. And there actually used to be a beautiful, beautiful Jewish community there. Most of them were murdered by the Nazis. I think it was in 1943. Okay, his father also was a Torah scholar, and he becomes a leader of the Jewish community in Salonika. I think I had mentioned this when we initially talked about the Jews in Salonika. You know, each group that came, if they came from a particular town even, they had like their own shul. So, you know, I think if I recall correctly, there were like 13 different shuls in the city of Salonika, you know, because each one came with their own specific casa. And I'm talking about, you know, among the Sephardic Jews. I mean, there were some Ashkenazi Jews there, and then there were the original Jews who had been living there. Okay. He headed, now we're talking about his father passes away, and everyone recognizes, obviously, the brilliance of this son. So he now heads the yeshiva in Salonika, and a lot of Turkish Jews, you know, will come there to study under him. Even Rabbi Yosef Karo, just to remind you, with Rabbi Yosef Karo was born in Spain, had to leave when he was just a little 4-year-old little boy. It must have been pretty traumatic, right? Suddenly being relocated, and he also ends up in the city of Adrianople, and he actually starts writing his work, the Beit Yosef. The Beit Yosef comes before the Shulchan Aruch. He starts writing that in Adrianople. So he lived for many years, close to 40 years in Turkey before he then relocates to Eretz Yisrael. So obviously Rabbi Yosef Karo would have been in correspondence, maybe came to learn for a while in Salonika. And he had various, so even in the Beit Yosef, I guess he discusses, you know, some points of law that might have disagreed with this Rabbi Tatatzik. So as I say, you're going to see how each one impacts the other. So it says for a while, this Rabbi Yosef Tatatzik lived in this little town, Saras, which is north of Salonika. Then he eventually returns again. And eventually he goes to Constantinople, and that's where he finally dies. Now he was also a Kabbalist. And he's the one sort of more like Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid from Germany. He led a very ascetic life. I put this down because I found it so fascinating when I was doing my research. He says, with the exception of the nights of Shabbos and festivals of Chagim, for 40 years, Rabbi Yosef never slept in a bed, but on a box with his feet on the ground. I don't think it does not sound very comfortable at all. All right. He would rise precisely at midnight to mourn the destruction of the temple and would then immerse himself in Torah study. How do we even know this? Because his wife, upon his death, told other people. And so, you know, that the story about him has come down through the ages. Okay, so 18 hours of his day were taken up with learning and teaching his disciples. The other 6 hours would take care of, I don't know, bodily needs, whatever. He had to eat at some point, right? You know, his little bit of sleeping, right? Very uncomfortably. He also, it's interesting, this Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Yosef Karo, they all felt that some voice from heaven spoke to them directly. He also calls it a Magid. Okay. And he claims that the grandfather also had received instructions from this Magid. And I remember when I was telling you about Rabbi Yosef Karo, how he and this man, they were both familiar with Shlomo Mochel, the one who we call a Navi Sheker, a false messiah, when he had made his acquaintance. For a while, Shlomo Mochel had gone there. And then, of course, you know, he returns to Italy where he meets his demise. And apparently he, you know, came to visit him in Salonika. And just like they say, Shlomo Mochel came to visit Rabbi Yosef Karo in Adrianople. Right? This is before he leaves for Israel. And just a little bit more to tell you, he was also very adept in astronomy and astrology, and, you know, and these were fields of study also, not him per se. Others studied mathematics, and then they also studied medicine. So you'll find numerous Rabbanim from this period and before in the medieval period, and these are the fields, the secular fields of study. But I think because they had an influence on Jewish life, and that medicine you can see because you want to take care of people. This is a foremost desire that Hashem, would want us to do, to how we should conduct and lead our lives. And the study of astrology that would also help you with the formation of when Chagim and dates on the calendar, and that's why those fields of study were considered acceptable. Okay, now I want to talk to you about the Radvaz. That's how he's known. His name is Rabbi David Ibn Zimra, and he lives from 1480 to 1575. He also was one of those Jews expelled from, so he's a young boy, right? He's 12 years old when he leaves Spain, and he comes, I guess, with his family, 12 years old. I don't think he's traveling by himself. And he also arrives in Sfat. Now, I don't know if he went directly there. Look at the next sentence. It does tell you. So his parents first went to Fez, Morocco, and then they went to Eretz Yisrael. I had mentioned this also in a prior lecture, that actually conditions in North Africa were pretty horrible. And many of these Jews, when they arrived, they're just left in a field. They wouldn't let them go into the cities. There are Jews already living there, but I'm talking about the Sultan, whoever was the Sultan. I'm talking about primarily Morocco and Algeria. So some Jews might have somehow ended up staying there, but that's why a lot of them don't even want to stay there. They're not welcome whatsoever. And many of them starved and died of disease. They're just left in a field there. So you can understand why the family would not want to remain anymore in Fez, Morocco. That's why they're going to leave. And I guess there's always this desire, among religious Jews, this desire that one should settle in the Holy Land. And at this point, it's starting slowly. It's never a large population in Israel. It's really quite small. We're talking about maybe a few thousands. That's it altogether. He studies under a Kabbalist and somebody who experienced many miracles, whatever. So this Rabbi, the Radvaz, was a very good student, and soon he became known, throughout, I don't know, that perhaps the Sephardic world, as being this very accomplished authority. Again, so he's also not just Kabbalah. You have to understand they're all studying halacha, and through the Gemara. Okay, the Radvaz then goes to Egypt. So that's what I wanted to show you. You see how they're all, you're talking about Spain or maybe Portugal, and then settling maybe for a time in Italy, maybe for a short time here in North Africa, and then eventually going though to the Ottoman Empire again, where they are welcomed to settle there by the Sultan. So Greece, right? Salonika has become a large Jewish community. Constantinople, obviously Adrianople today is Izmir in Turkey, and then eventually in Israel as well. Okay. Yeah. So he goes to live in Egypt, all right, in the year 1540.
Why did they leave Sfat to go to Cairo?
Because he wanted to learn under certain great Rabbanim who had settled in Cairo.
But he learned there with Joseph Caro, didn't he?
They're all crisscrossing at the same time period. Let's read to see why. Why does he go to Cairo? He was soon recognized, he was a brilliant scholar, became the chief rabbi of Cairo. If you got that position, I guess you too would leave Israel, because it's a very honorary thing. Maybe life was good there, and it was greatly honored. In Sfat, he's just one of maybe numerous other scholars, but in Cairo, he's given, great respect, and they make him the chief rabbi of that community. He was there in that position for 40 years. That's pretty long. My father was a Rav for over 50 years in the same community, but 40 years also quite long. Look at this, though. I found this interesting. It says he did not earn his livelihood from the rabbinate. He engaged in business and became a very wealthy and benevolent merchant. So this could have been another reason why he just stayed in Cairo, all those 40 years. Obviously, he was very active in the communal affairs of all the different Egyptian. So at this point, there are numerous synagogues, right? And we learn about the Jews mostly in Cairo, but I don't know, maybe some are still in Alexandria, that would have been from an earlier time period, but perhaps they are still living there. This I found interesting. So this is what he's known for. So among what had he done, right? Changes that he made, different takanos. He abolished the custom of using the Seleucid era. Seleucid, you're talking about Antiochus. That's what the Seleucid era is, as the basis for determining the year used as the date on bills of divorce or of sale. Again, I know because my father was a Rav, and I remember writing out the shtar for a get for someone. It's very precisely worded, and you have to put down the name of the community. It's very, very, very exacting, wording that is used. So apparently, and right, obviously you would include naturally the date as well. But they were counting like from the time period of these Seleucids, from those Antiochuses. There were numerous, there may be 7, 8 Antiochuses. And that had been using throughout the Jews living in that whole Middle Eastern area. And apparently even from the time period of Alexander the Great. So just to remind you, Alexander the Great conquered this vast territory, but upon his death, his empire is divided into 3. There are those still in Greece. There are those in Egypt. These are what we call the Ptolemies. In English, it's spelled Ptolemy, Ptolemies, and the Seleucids, which is Syria. So, for a time period, Israel's ruled over by the Ptolemies, and then the Seleucids get the upper hand, and they are the ones ruling over until we have the story, of Hanukkah, and eventually in the year 140 BCE, we get rid of the Seleucids, and we're living an independent Jewish life. Okay, with in charge of our own Jewish government. So whatever, he's going to change this. Apparently that was called Minyan Shtarot. But apparently already in the time period of Israel, so I'm saying from that 140 BCE, the time period of the Hashmonaim, in Israel, they already discarded that. They were counting a different way. But I guess in the other Middle Eastern countries, they're still using that way of counting from the Seleucid era. And the Radbaz says, and obviously everyone followed him then. He said, that's it. We're no longer doing that. We're going. I don't know if they started counting then how we do, not from what we say is the creation of the world. Maybe that's what it's referring to. But whatever, they're not counting anymore from that Seleucid era. The Radbaz had a very large yeshiva there. He had many, many disciples. And now what you see from the names, how each one, as I say, impacts the other. So one of them was this Rabbi Bezalel Ashkenazi, right? We already had learned, right, that, for example, the Ari would have learned under him. He wrote this book, Shita Mekubetza. We mentioned it last week. Obviously, the Ari, all right? And another man, we're not going to learn so much about him, but just this other individual is named Rabbi Yaakov Castro, and he becomes the future leader of the Egyptian Jews, okay? But after living for 40 years, right, in Cairo, and obviously he is a wealthy man in addition to being the Rav of the community, he decides in 1553 to go back to Israel, and he actually lives in Yerushalayim. He doesn't settle in Tzfat initially, we'll find out. He sees terribly poor, destitute Jews who are living there. I don't quite follow this so well, though. It says, he abolished the old practice under which Torah scholars were obligated to pay only half the amount of taxes as non-scholars. So like modern day Israelis would not like this at all, right? So, that you're saying, that they're, so to speak, these yeshiva people, well, they don't have to pay as much taxes as anybody else. So he abolishes that idea. He says, everybody has to pay the same amount, no matter what. Meanwhile, conditions worsen and worsen in Yerushalayim. I told you, great poverty, disease. It's not a good place to live, unfortunately. And now the Pasha, Pasha is more like a governor. There's a sultan in Constantinople who is ruling over the entire Ottoman Empire. But in each region, right, you have to have somebody else. So that's called the Pasha, or governor. Okay. So obviously the Radbaz is a wealthy man, so he's obviously going to try to confiscate a lot of this wealth. So the Ravaz leaves Jerusalem and then he goes to live in Tzfat. Okay. He was very greatly honored, revered there by the local Beis Din and by Rabbi Yosef Karo. All right. It says when there was a decision made by the Beis Din, he said Rabbi Yosef Karo. Now remember, he's this preeminent scholar in Israel, but he affords great honor to the Radvaz, and he's the one who will like sign the final document, whatever the decision that came out of the Beis Din was. Again, he left numerous responsa, and he writes this poem, was based on the Ibn Gabiro, and also with elements of Kabbalah. So you can just see the intermingling of ideas and concepts of Talmud study, halacha, but also Kabbalah. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about another individual. He's called the Mabit, and I saw his name crop up very often also. His name is Rabbi Moshe Trani. He lives from 1500, so obviously born after the expulsion, and he lives to 1580. He first learns under an uncle of his, Rabbi Aaron Trani, who was a scholar from Italy. There's nothing to do, obviously, then with the expulsion, right? They come from Italy, and they left southern Italy, and they go to Salonika. So again, you can see Salonika is a center of great learning in this time period. He comes there. His uncle comes in 1497. Obviously, he was born in 1500. All right. But at the age of 18, this Rabbi Moshe, trying the Mabit, decides to move to Tzfat, and now he's going to become one of the disciples of the Rabbi Yaakov Bei Rav. Remember, we talked about that great Samicha debate. Rabbi Yaakov Bei Rav, he's the one who decides, enough scholars get together and they vote on one chief Rav who can then give smicha to others in turn, the smicha, so to speak, in that chain of tradition from Moshe Rabbeinu, that ultimately they could form a Sanhedrin. Okay, so in 1538, he was ordained with smicha. This would have been the same time Rabbi Yosef Karo received smicha from this Rabbi Yaakov Bei Rav. And then he becomes also a member of the Beis Din of Tzfat. And apparently once Rabbi Yosef Karo passed away in the year 1575, for the 5 more years of this Mabit's life, he's now the head of the Beis Din. He was known as a great halachicist, and tons of responsa. They would write back and forth with people posing questions to him. Apparently, there's a book ring. It's called Teshuvot Mabit, and it contains 806 replies. He must have been a prolific letter writer to answer all these shalot. He's now sending back the Teshuvot. Shalot to Teshuvot, that's responsa. Okay. Obviously, he kept up this very close relationship and correspondence with Rabbi Yosef Karo on different halachic issues. Apparently, they often disagreed. So it says here the debates became quite heated, and sometimes there was some bad feeling between the two of them because each one, was adamant that his interpretation was the correct one. But it says the Mabit did visit Rabbi Yosef Karo, on his last sickness. And apparently Rabbi Yosef Karo blessed him on his deathbed. I guess he forgave him for whatever grief he might have been causing him prior to this. He wrote a sefer called Kiryat Sefer. Isn't there a town in Israel?
Yes,
called,
yes.
Right. Okay. Which is like a, so to speak, a rewriting of the Rambam's Mishnah Torah. But the Mishnah Torah doesn't give you the source of the halacha. Where did the Rambam, how does he come to this decision what the halacha is? So, the Mabit, when he, so to speak, rewrites the Mishnah Torah, he gives the actual source. So there were Rabbanim even prior to him who were already doing that, because people wanted to know, well, where did the Rambam find this material to say that this is the halacha? Okay. Right. And this I found interesting. He also then determines whether it's a Torah midoraisa, that would mean a Torah law that comes from, in other words, it's coming from the Torah itself, or Torah midorabanan, or was it a rabbinic enactment or interpretation of what's written in the Torah? and I'm doing, Daf Yomi, and there's definitely, you can see that they question often when they're talking about a halachic, particular halachic issue, in other words, well, is this based on something, midoraisa? Is this something that's actually written in the Torah? Or is this an enactment at a later date that's coming from the Rabban? Because there's a difference in emphasis. Obviously, if it's something midoraisa, you can't possibly change it. It's more authoritative than if it's just midrabban. Not to say that you can't follow halacha decisions of the Rabbanim at a later date. It's just not quite the same authority. Okay. I'm going to mention another individual here. His name is Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz. The last thing about, the bit that he had two sons who become well known. One is a Rav in Cairo, and his name is Rabbi Yosef Trani, and we might learn more about him at a later date. Okay, so the next one is Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz. You see, they're all spanning that 16th century. Right? He was a disciple of this Rabbi Yosef Tatzik. Remember, he's the first Rav we discussed here. He was born in Salonika, but in the year 1535, he's 30 years old, and then he decides to pick up and move to Eretz Yisrael, and there he settles in Tzfat. So Tzfat's becoming known as a great center of learning, and of course, it will be ultimately known mostly, I think, for Kabbalah, right? And he became a great Kabbalist. Look at this. His brother-in-law was that Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. Now remember, Moshe Cordovero is the one who influences the Ari. And so he was actually his disciple, and Rabbi Yosef Karo used to attend those lectures, because I told you he also was very interested in Kabbalah. He's most famous, and we say this all the time, for that beautiful piyut that he wrote, Lecha Dodi, right? We say it right every Shabbos. And the interesting thing is that the Lecha Dodi has found acceptance not just in the Sephardic, prayer book, but Ashkenazim, we say it as well. Maybe because it's so very special. Then I'm not sure at what point the nigun that we use, was adopted, but it certainly has come down. Look at this through the centuries. He also wrote other, books dealing with halacha and Kabbalah. He wrote some commentaries on different books of the Tanakh. Apparently, ones that have come down to us, and one on Megillas Esther, one on Megillas Rus. And I guess, I'm not familiar with them, but apparently they are easy to read and to understand. Okay, I think that's enough. Or just see, but the things, his interpretations, they're based obviously on the Talmud, right? Gemara, Medrash, right? Those are some of the wonderful stories that help explain things in the Tanakh. Targumim, that would, again, that's also explanations on the Torah, but also the Zohar. So you can see all of the influences on his life, and now he's putting them into his works. Okay, we mentioned this man before. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about him. This is the Rabbi Bezalel Ashkenazi, who wrote this Shita Mekubetzet. He was originally a Sephardic scholar. He grew up and spent his life amongst Sephardim. But why does he have that name, Ashkenazi? Because by birth, he was an Ashkenazi. And apparently his uncle was a great scholar in the city of Ludmir in Poland. Okay, so it's very often you will find a Sephardic person and their last name is Ashkenazi. You probably wondered how, because somewhere way back, they had come from Ashkenaz or somewhere in that part of Europe. He was born in Eretz Israel, but he left at an early age and he goes to Egypt. So you see how they're traveling back and forth. Again, maybe you go where opportunity knocks, right? I mean, people do that all the time for sure nowadays. But they're all within like a certain circumference. It's Greece, maybe Turkey, maybe Constantinople, Adrianople, Israel, and Egypt. Like a big circle there. And there he studies under the Radvaz. And he became, known as a great scholar. So then when the Radvaz leaves, remember he had been the chief rabbi there for 40 years. So when he leaves, this Rabbi Bezalel now becomes the chief rabbi of all the Egyptian Jews. Okay, I don't have to read any more there. But in the year 1588, right, so he had lived there for quite a while, okay, over 30 years. He returns to Israel, and then he settles initially in Jerusalem. So I guess maybe that seems to be the destination of choice initially, but we'll see what's going to happen. And there again, he was a well-recognized, honored scholar. So he serves both the Sephardi and the Ashkenazi Jewish communities. And he also, as Jews did in those days, that he traveled. I don't have any more. He traveled also to Egypt, Syria, and Turkey, raising funds. That's a very important job, being a fundraiser, right? Because nothing is going to be accomplished if you don't have the money, to run various things. Support your yeshivas, your students, etc. Or also sometimes they just needed the money to survive, depending. Remember, he's coming from Jerusalem, which I told you is a very, very poor Jewish community. He wrote this very famous work called the Shita Mikubetzes. I always check with my son, Yechiel. And he's very familiar. And there was a Rav here last week, and he said also he had definitely studied through the Shita Mikubetzes. It's a compilation of the Chidushim, like new analyses of many of what the Rishonim had written on different tractates of the Gemara. So I certainly never did it because in my day nobody ever learned Gemara. So, but I guess real Talmudic scholars, or yeshivas, nowadays, they would be familiar with his work, Shita Mikubetzes. Okay, some he wrote, some possibly. They don't feel. We all give credit to him, but nowadays we don't think that really he wrote everything. He might have helped to compile things from other scholars and Rabbonim, but we're not giving credence to him to actually having authored the entire work. Okay. He's also known as halachas. Well, it would make sense if he studies Gemara, he knows halacha. And also he had many responsa. And eventually, it says actually it was published while he was still alive in the year 1590. Sometimes these Shelos to Shuvot were published after a person had passed away, but his actually was published in Venice, right? We'll learn later what a great publishing community there was in the city of Venice. And who was one of his chief disciples is the Ari. So again, you see now this picture, one impacts on the other, learns under somebody else. I find it so interesting. I think all right, we'll do one more person, okay, and then we'll pause, and we can always finish the other Rabbanim next week, and then we'll do the Jews of the Renaissance. So the other great scholar from this time period is the Al-Shich, okay. A lot of these Rabbanim, that I'm choosing is because I have heard of them, actually. So not that I am any great scholar, of the Talmud or anything of these works, but either I've heard their names mentioned in lectures, or perhaps I've read an article, but I definitely have heard of the Al-Shich. Okay, so again, he lives from 1508 to 1593. He was born, again, a family of Spanish exiles, all right? And he lives in Adrianople. And that's why he comes to learn under Rabbi Yosef Kari. Remember, Rabbi Yosef Kari, I told you, lived about close to 40 years in Adrianople. But eventually he goes to Salonika. Look at this interesting crisscross of where they're all going and settling. And there, where does he study? Under this Rabbi Yosef Taitatzik, okay, who I had never heard of before. I was doing this research, but I kept on seeing his name cropping up. So I thought I wanted to know something about him. So the Al-Shich comes to Eretz Yisrael as a young man. He spends most of his life then in Sfat. And he again was one of those younger Rabbanim who are ordained with Samicha by that Rabbi Yaakov Bey Rav, all right? And he served then also as a Dayan on the Beis Din of Tzfat. So you see, they know one another, right? They work together. You know, I found that very interesting. He devoted a major part of his time to study and teaching of Gemara, all right? And he also, you know, as serving on the Beis Din, so he would have, you know, been involved when a case would come before and determining, you know, what's the proper way to proceed. And this is what he's actually known for. Apparently, doing all these other things, right? Serving on the Beis Din, you know, probably learning, you know, in yeshiva there. He found the time to concentrate on biblical studies, preparing sermons for the community. He was a gifted preacher, and his sermons were eagerly anticipated. You know how certain people, you know, you go, oh, so-and-so is giving a lecture, I got to go, you know. The name gets out. Exactly. From these sermons, he developed his popular Torah commentary called Torah Moshe, or it's simply called the Al-Shich HaKadosh. So maybe when I've been doing research on something in Tanakh, maybe that's how I came to know his name, or listening to somebody else's lecture, and they will mention the Al-Shich. And what does he say? You know, nowadays you could buy books of sermons, which very good helps young rabbis. You know, and they get some of their ideas from that. So apparently he has one that's first published on Bereshis, and that comes out in Constantinople in 1595. Again, that would have been after his death. I like this. It says, in his introduction, he wrote that since so many other preachers had adopted his sermons as their own, often missing important points in his thinking, he felt compelled to leave his works published to end this deplorable practice. Yeah. And, you know, I do give credits to Rabbanim when they do admit that they've gotten their ideas right from another source, you know. And when he died, then you know, the rest of the commentaries published. Again, look, Venice, 1601, Venice. We'll just finish up this. He also authored commentaries in other books of the Torah. One's called Chavatzelet HaSharon. That's on the book of Daniel. All right, 1563. I think that's incorrect, unless it was published at an earlier date while he was still living. And apparently he wrote a commentary to Midrash. He calls it Shari. I'm not familiar with that. And that contains dissertations on whatever, on various things, issues dealing with Yahadus. He was also a Kabbalist. I guess you can't live in Israel this time period without being familiar with Kabbalah. And I don't even want to say everything he says about that. But again, it's based on biblical text and gives his interpretation, but using a Kabbalist, you know, outlook on life when he writes. Again, obviously, he was very popular darshan. That would mean a preacher, right? And his works became the building blocks for generations of preachers for their own sermons. So I guess I'll have to ask my son, right? You know, maybe that's where when as I say, I've attended a lecture or heard something or read an article, and they'll refer to, the Al-Shich says such and such. So I guess it's based on these writings that were published. And again, they become the building blocks for generations of preachers for their own sermons, or you can take like part of it and then expand upon it, you know, with your own viewpoint or where you're living or what's happening in your age. And apparently he wrote a commentary to Avos, you know, Pirkei Avos, and also on the Haggadah. Maybe I said, you know, Art Scrolls publishes so many Haggadahs. Maybe there's one that's just about the Al-Shich, what he wrote on the Haggadah. He also had Shnei Lotim to Shavot that were later published, a responsa. Apparently there were 140, not quite like 800, but, and they again would have been published after his death. Venice, 1605, Venice. He dies in 1590 at the age of 82. So it's interesting. Remember, it's such an unhealthy place to live in Yerushalayim. But these Rabbanim who were living in Tzfat, there are a lot of them, not the Arizal, he must have been something, wrong with him. I mean, we don't know why he died at only 38, but many of them live, you know, to a good age. Many of them are in their 80s when they pass away. But call a kavod to this man. So he's 82 years old, but he needs to raise funds, right, to help support the institutions in Israel. So he actually leaves Tzfat, and there was a terrible famine even in Tzfat in those days. He only comes back in 1593, so he's gone for, I don't know, a full year, but he's gone for many, many months. And then he died soon after. And his disciple is this Rabbi Chaim Vital, and he's the one who brings us down the Kabbalistic works of the Ari. So whatever. So next time we'll talk about Rabbi Chaim Vital, and we will continue from there. So be well, everyone. Bye, guys who were listening to me on Zoom.
Thank you.
Bye. Nice to see all of you. Hope you were able to follow all right. Okay,
Love
great.
it.
Bye-bye. Okay, bye.